We're gonna actually bring ChatGPT on to see what it says about complexity in coffee. It's hard for people to really decipher what complexity in coffee really is.
It's like a journey in a cup, revealing different layers and nuances over time.
And I was pleasantly shocked how I was still able to extract the coffee. You know, complexity is one of those things to where, again, like I said, I thought that it was more so like people not really understanding what complexity is. We live right now. And we're all doing pretty good right now. I got an interesting one to talk about today. We're going to be talking about complexity in coffee. And without giving me just being on my soapbox talking about it, we're going to do it a little differently this time. We're going to actually bring ChatGPT on to see what it says about complexity in coffee, what it really means. Probably I'll learn something from it. Probably you will too. But I have my own understanding of what complexity is. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and get ChatGPT up and we're gonna go. Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, what can I do for you today?
Okay, great. Can you change your voice to like a woman's voice?
Sure, I can do that. How's this?
All right, please talk.
All right, back to my usual voice.
No. I want you to stay a woman's voice.
Got it. I'll continue with this voice. How can I help you today?
Okay. I want to talk about complexity in coffee. Let me give you my definition of what I think complexity in coffee is, and then I want you to give me an understanding of what you think, okay? Do you understand that so far?
Absolutely. I'm ready to hear your definition, and then we can dive into discussing complexity in coffee. Go ahead.
Since you are hopefully enjoying the video, you like, subscribe? Okay. What I believe complexity in coffee is, a lot of times it's hard for people to really decipher what complexity in coffee really is, meaning that there's so many different elements, different flavors, different notes that people may be tasting, and they can't really define exactly what complexity really is or what they're really tasting. So that's more so the gist of what I think complexity in coffee is. It's just a way of people not truly really understanding what they are tasting. What do you think about that?
I see what you mean. Complexity in coffee can indeed be elusive, as it involves a dynamic range of flavors, aromas, and textures that interact in a cup. It's not just about identifying individual notes, like fruitiness or nuttiness, but also how these elements weave together to create a complex, harmonious experience. This can include layers of flavor that evolve as the coffee cools, or subtle undertones that complement the main profile. Complexity often reveals itself through a balance of acidity, sweetness, bitterness, and body, making each sip a new discovery. What do you find most intriguing about complexity in coffee?
I like the way you put that. My biggest thing I do like the cooling aspect of coffee, how it does change the coffee. Like when you initially taste the coffee, when it's a lot warmer or hotter, it tends to start to change and I'm tasting different things of the coffee.
That transformation as coffee cools can be really fascinating. It's like a journey in a cup, revealing different layers and nuances over time. What are some of your favorite changes you've noticed as your coffee cools?
One of the biggest things is the characteristics or the degree of acidity in the cup. I think sometimes it just depends on the coffee. In the beginning, when it's hotter, it's a little bit more violent, more pronounced. But as it cools, the acidity gets a little bit more softer.
Exactly. The acidity softens and integrates more into the overall flavor profile. It can bring out subtler, nuanced notes that might be overshadowed when the coffee is hot. It's like the flavors harmonize and reveal a different aspect of the coffee's character. Do you have a favorite coffee that you think showcases this transformation particularly well?
Lately, not so much. I do have this Mexican coffee that presents itself more of a chocolatey type of peanut taste, but as it cools, some of the acidity is more pronounced, so it makes it to me a little bit more exciting. There's less bitterness in the coffee, but something about the way that the coffee moves and kind of changes and kind of presents itself to me, that's the thing that I look forward to. And, you know, brewing does take an aspect of how it may change for that particular moment.
That Mexican coffee sounds like a great example of complexity. The way it starts with those rich, chocolatey peanut notes and then reveals a lively acidity as it cools must be quite a treat. It's
Yeah.
those exploring how different brewing methods or even slight adjustments in your technique affect this transformation can be a fun way to deepen your appreciation for it. Is there a particular brewing method you prefer for bringing out these characteristics?
Really just the Hario B60, probably doing I think we talked about this before, about a 60-70% pour in the beginning and then doing the rest of the pour. It's a 2 pour method. And I've noticed that that's been working out pretty well lately.
Yes, the Hario V60 with that 2 pour method can really highlight those complex flavors. Starting with a 60 to 70% pour helps saturate the grounds evenly, allowing for a nice bloom and initial extraction. Then, finishing with the second pour helps to draw out those deeper, more nuanced flavors. It's great to hear that it's working well for you. Have you experimented with different grind sizes or water temperatures with this method to see how it changes the cup?
Yes, I have. The grind size is more so the same. I try to keep the grind size more so the same, even though I'm dealing with the different degree of roast level with the coffee. But I've noticed that with the different temperatures, especially when I go a lot lower in temperatures, the flavor is a little bit more muted, but I can essentially extract more, but not feel or taste the bitterness in the coffee, which is really a way of where I'm understanding that perceived bitterness, how that changes with different temperatures.
That's a valuable insight. Lowering the water temperature can indeed result in a more controlled extraction, reducing bitterness while still bringing out a depth of flavor. It's interesting how tweaking the temperature can mute certain flavors, yet enhance others, offering a smoother cup with less pronounced bitterness. It sounds like you're dialing in your technique to get the most out of your coffee. Have you found a particular temperature range that works best for you with this method?
I think it kind of still depends on the coffee and the roast degree, but I'm leaning towards a 185, 190 degrees, even 170 degrees. That's really kind of bringing out these more mellow but still sweeter type of cup of coffees.
Those temperature ranges can definitely highlight different aspects of the coffee. Around 185 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit, you're likely getting a good balance, with sweetness and body coming through without too much acidity or bitterness. Dropping down to 170 degrees can soften the cup even more, emphasizing those mellow, sweet characteristics. It sounds like you've got a good handle on adjusting for the roast level and flavor profile. Have you noticed any specific coffees that respond particularly well to these lower temperatures?
I would say the like the Brazilians, the Mexicans of the world, the Ethiopian type of coffees, the African coffees, a little less so. But let's get back on the whole complexity thing. I want you to kind of go delve a little bit deeper into what you're saying as a way to really appreciate or understand complexity in coffees. What I'm understanding what you're saying is that it's not just a initial taste. It's the whole combination, right?
Exactly. Complexity in coffee is about the entire sensory experience. It's the interplay of various flavors, aromas, textures, and even the aftertaste that makes each sip unique. When you take a sip, you might first notice the dominant flavors, like chocolate or fruitiness. But as you continue to drink, you start to pick up on more subtle notes, like a hint of spice or a floral aroma, and the way these elements blend together. Complexity also involves the balance of different taste components, such as acidity, sweetness, and bitterness, and how they evolve as the coffee cools. It's about the journey from the first sip to the last, noticing how the coffee opens up and reveals different characteristics along the way. Do you find that focusing on these elements enhances your appreciation of a cup's complexity?
I think so, quite a bit. How would you, I guess, categorize or describe to me a less complex coffee as from, when it is hot compared to when it's cooled down? What does that look like?
A less complex coffee might present itself with a more straightforward, uniform flavor profile. When it's hot, you might notice a dominant taste, such as a single note of chocolate or a generic sweetness, without much variation or depth. As it cools, the flavor might remain relatively consistent, without revealing new layers or complexities. The taste might be more linear, lacking the evolving character you'd find in a more complex cup. In a less complex coffee, you might not experience the same distinct changes in acidity, sweetness, or bitterness as the temperature drops. Instead, the flavor might stay fairly uniform, with the initial impression carrying through to the last sip. This doesn't mean the coffee is bad, it just offers a simpler, more straightforward flavor experience. Do you have any coffees in mind that fit this description?
Oh, there's a couple. Like sometimes the Brazilian coffee that I usually drink and sell and everything, it presents itself very chocolatey, but then it has a little bit of acidity aftertaste, soft acidity, and it kind of stays there. But what I've noticed is that that's heavily dependent to an extent on the actual temperature that I usually brew the coffee at.
It makes sense that the temperature you're brewing at would influence how those flavors present themselves. With Brazilian coffee, which often has those chocolatey and nutty notes, brewing at different temperatures can either highlight its smoothness or bring out more of that soft acidity. A higher temperature might push the chocolate notes to the forefront, while a bit lower might mellow things out, allowing that subtle acidity to peek through. It's all about finding that sweet spot that brings out the best in the coffee. Have you found a particular temperature that seems to work best for your Brazilian coffee?
I think about 185, 190.
That sounds like a great range to work with, especially for bringing out the best in Brazilian coffee. It strikes a nice balance between the rich chocolatey notes and that gentle acidity. Have you tried this temperature range with other coffees? And if so, how did they turn out?
Wait, I have another quick question because I think you bring up a really good point. So we're talking about complexity mainly as when it is after the brew and then as it cools. So is that the journey that we're taking?
Yes, exactly. The journey of complexity in coffee extends from the moment it's brewed through to when it cools. Initially, you'll experience the more dominant flavors and aromas, which can be influenced by the brewing method, temperature, and grind size. As the coffee cools, these flavors can evolve, revealing new layers and subtleties that weren't as apparent at first. This progression from the initial hot sip to the cooler, more nuanced flavors is a big part of what makes coffee tasting so enjoyable. It's like a story unfolding with each sip. Have you noticed this evolution in your own coffee experiences?
I have. And one of the things that I would like you to touch on first is that let's just say we use a scenario of working with a coffee and brewing the coffee at a lower temperature, like an extreme one, let's say 170, 165 degrees. Does that necessarily mean that the coffee will be less complex because the coffee is a lot cooler compared to it being at 190, 200 degrees?
Brewing at a lower temperature, like 170 or 165 degrees Fahrenheit, can indeed affect the perceived complexity of the coffee, but it doesn't necessarily mean the coffee will be less complex. Lower temperatures can result in a slower extraction process, which might bring out different flavor compounds compared to higher temperatures. You might find that the coffee has a softer, more delicate profile with subtle nuances that emerge as it cools, offering a different kind of complexity. At lower temperatures, the extraction might emphasize certain flavors over others, potentially muting acidity and highlighting sweetness or body. This can lead to a unique and enjoyable flavor profile that still has depth and character, just in a different way than a hotter brew. It's all about experimenting and seeing how different temperatures affect the coffee you're brewing. Have you tried brewing at these lower temperatures? And if so, what was your experience?
Yes, I have. I did an experiment a couple of weeks ago. I brewed the coffee at 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and I was pleasantly shocked how I was still able to extract the coffee but the coffees tasted completely different, meaning that when I was tasting the coffee, even though at certain cases, different scenarios, it was over extracted, but it didn't really taste that way. The bitterness was more so at bay. And I think that was because of the lower temperature, something like that. That's one of the things that I'm still constantly kind of trying to understand.
It's definitely an interesting area to explore. Brewing at a lower temperature can slow down the extraction process, potentially leading to a different balance of flavors. At 160 degrees Fahrenheit, the extraction of certain compounds, especially those responsible for bitterness, is less aggressive. This can result in a cup that has less perceived bitterness, even if the coffee might technically be over-extracted. The lower temperature could be extracting more of the soluble compounds that contribute to sweetness and body, while keeping harsher elements at bay. This experiment shows how much impact water temperature can have on the flavor profile and complexity of a coffee. It's a great reminder of the value in experimenting with different variables to find what works best for each coffee. Are you planning to continue experimenting with different temperatures to see how it affects other coffees?
Of course, yes, I am. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm wondering, curious though, if 160 is the least amount. What do you think about that? Can I even try probably 150 degrees?
You can certainly experiment with temperatures as low as 150 degrees Fahrenheit, though it might push the boundaries of traditional brewing methods. At such low temperatures, extraction becomes much slower, and you might find that certain flavors are under-extracted, leading to a very mild or even weak cup of coffee. However, it's all about what you're aiming for and what flavors you want to explore. Going as low as 150 degrees could result in a very delicate cup, with some flavors being more pronounced and others potentially lacking. You might not achieve the full spectrum of flavors you'd get at higher temperatures, but it could be an interesting experiment to see how the coffee's profile changes. If you try it, you might want to extend the brew time to allow more extraction, but be prepared for a very different tasting experience. Are you thinking of giving it a try?
I think I will try it at 150. Of course, I think I'll go with a finer, probably espresso type of grind, and probably do like a pulse method of using a Hario V60 switch of letting the coffee sit inside of its bed for a little bit and then letting it drip down, and then doing that a couple of times in order to bring up the extraction as much as I can. What do you think about that?
That sounds like an intriguing experiment. Using a finer grind and the pulse method with the Hario V60 switch at such a low temperature could yield some unique results. It will be interesting to see how the flavors develop with this approach. Let me know how it turns out.
Okay, before we end off on today's talk, do you think I have a high possibility of failing at that challenge?
I wouldn't say you have a high probability of failing, especially since you're approaching it with a thoughtful and experimental mindset. With any new brewing method, especially one as unconventional as this, there might be some trial and error involved. However, your plan to use a finer grind and the pulse method shows a good understanding of how to manipulate variables to achieve your desired outcome. Even if the first attempt doesn't turn out as expected, it's all part of the learning process. So I'd say go for it with an open mind and see what you discover.
Okay, I will. I appreciate our talk. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for the understanding more of complexity in coffee.
You're welcome. I'm glad we could chat about coffee complexity. Enjoy experimenting, and feel free to reach out anytime. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
That was quite amazing. I don't know if you got anything from that. I got a lot of things about that. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this a little bit more because, complexity is one of those things to where, again, like I said, I thought that it was more so like people not really understanding what complexity is. And it's about the whole journey. And I love going through that journey with coffee from hot to cold. What kind of things do you experience when you go about drinking your cup of coffee? Do you drink it all as quickly as possible? Do you like go on that journey, let it take its time? Things do you do in order for you to enjoy your cup of coffee? Let's talk about it. And I enjoyed this talk. Hopefully, we'll do some more of these. Let me know what you think. And then talk to you later. Bye.